Hello, I'm Gina King. I'm here at Life Body Soul in Wallsend today to talk to a very special lady, Suzanne Lambert, author of this book here, Christmas at the Ragdoll Orphanage. Back in 2013, this book was released and I picked it up whilst out shopping and found it just to be totally enchanting. It's the perfect festive read, and we are very fortunate to have Suzanne with us here today to talk a little bit more about life at the orphanage.
Hello. Many years ago, I heard the most amazing Christmas story. It was such a wonderful story, and I remember it brought a tear to my eyes. I loved it so much that every year it was a tradition in our house on Christmas Eve to listen to the story of the rag dolls. I will never forget my daughter's first Christmas 30 years ago, and that moment when my mum walked in, took Gemma out of my arms and sat down with her on her knee in front of the Christmas tree and began to tell my daughter the story of the rag dolls. It was incredible to stand watching and listening, and yet again it brought a tear to my eye. It's so special because it's true, and I would like to share that story with you now. The rag doll. It was a bitterly cold Christmas Eve, and Nancy was struggling to get 36 very excited children to bed. Noisy task as the snow had been falling all day, and although it was very exciting for the children, it was going to be impossible to calm them all down and get them to sleep. The war was over at last, and Nancy was determined to make this a special Christmas for the children. 17 years I've been here now, she thought. So many Christmases. She still looked back on the day that she'd arrived, still thought about her mother and how she first felt standing at those large iron gates. And yet she'd made a life here, found a job, or more of a vocation really it was, she supposed, looking after the children in the nursery. And it was a job she loved, even on the longest and most tiring days, when the chores seemed never ending. Christmas Eve and still so much to do. The orphanage was full this year. The war had added to the numbers. There was no doubt about that. But Nancy was determined that every child would have a wonderful Christmas. She was worried though. Times were hard, and she was concerned that there wouldn't be enough sweets or donations for the children. There were no Santa sacks or brightly coloured stockings for these children, so Nancy had tied pretty coloured ribbons and bells, just like her own mother had shown her, to each of the socks, which would dangle at the end of the 36 beds. Earlier today, the children had been allowed to visit the kitchen to bake biscuits with cook. Nancy looked round the dormitory at the crumbs all over the floor and the drops of spilt milk. Who cares, she thought. The children had smiles on their faces, and there'd been lots of laughter as they put out the biscuits and milk for Santa and the reindeers. The storybooks had been read, prayers said, and finally the children were beginning to settle. I'll clear up when they're asleep, said Nancy to herself, and please let it be soon, she smiled. Just as Nancy reached for the light, there was an excited whisper from one of the little girls. My friend at school is getting a rag doll. Can you imagine that? A rag doll for Christmas. It was simply too much, and Nancy felt a catch at the back of her throat and had to will back tears. One tear did manage to escape, and she wiped it away hurriedly on her apron. This simply will not do, she said to herself. Pull yourself together, there's lots to do. It was fine, it really was. A very kind benefactor to the orphanage had sent little cars for the boys, and the stockings with the sweets and oranges for each child looked so pretty. For goodness sake, stop worrying, Nancy said to herself. It had been a wonderful Christmas Eve for the children, and everything had gone to plan. Her pleas to the cook to let the children bake biscuits had been granted, and the children's squeals could be heard all along the corridors. The paper lanterns the children had made were draped around the dining room and the playroom, and Nancy smiled, remembering the squeals of delight. Yes, it had been a wonderful day. As night time drew near, Nancy went to close the curtains and paused to watch the snow still falling. It will be fine, she said to herself. It will be fine. And yet those whispered words stayed with her. A rag doll. Can you imagine? Well, she'd have to do something about it. It was up to her to make it happen. After all, Christmas was a time for magic, wasn't it? Post-war austerity for once worked in her favour. In 1946, nothing was thrown away. Old clothes were torn up into rags, buttons, ribbons and scraps of wools were saved. And Nancy got out her button box. Some of the rags were used to tie the girl's hair, but not tonight. Nancy had another idea for the rags. She spread out everything she could find on the large table next to the sewing machine. Then she began. Hour after hour, the snow still falling, the radio in the corner of the room playing Christmas carols, Nancy rolled the rags to make dolls. She sewed on buttons for eyes, wool for the hair, and ribbons to tie it. She sewed until the early hours of the morning, not even stopping for a cup of tea. It really was a miracle, thought Nancy, that she just finished putting the last rag doll into the stockings when the chapel bell rang at 6 o'clock. Today the children didn't need to be summoned twice. They jumped out of their beds, so excited, and rushed to the stockings hanging at the edge of their bed. Oh my goodness, I have a rag doll. Me too. Me too. What colour is yours? Mine has a pink dress. Oh, mine has blue eyes just like mine. And so it went on. Tiredness forgotten, Nancy stood and watched and listened to the sound of excited, happy children. Christmas is magic, she said to herself, then hurried away to begin breakfast. If it was possible to look into somebody's soul, it would have been an honour to see Nancy's at that moment. It must have been so pure and beautiful. Now, somewhere in the world today, those children will have experienced many more Christmas mornings with, I imagine, a little more than an orange and a rag doll. I'm also sure that their hearts were filled with so much joy that Christmas morning in 1946 when they received the greatest gift of all, love. I'm so proud to tell you that Nancy was my mother, and I was a child brought to the orphanage door, and she never tired of telling me growing up that from the moment I was placed in her arms, she knew God had sent her a daughter. My mother devoted her whole life to children, to care for them, but also to love them. And she made each and every one of them a promise. I will never forget you. And I heard her say that so many times when they left to be adopted or to new homes. She would say, I will always remember you. Shortly before her death in 2005, she was suffering from dementia. And yet one day the carers said to me, she's been asking today, where are the children? So my mother kept her promise. She never forgot them. I hope you enjoyed the story of the rag dolls, and I would like to take this opportunity to wish you all a very, very happy Christmas. And I hope and pray that Christmas magic surrounds you always. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was wonderful. If you would like to know a bit more about Suzanne and her other publications, you can do so by visiting www.suzannelambert.com.